Have you ever felt so lost that there seemed to be no way out? I was at rock bottom, literally. The mud seemed to be my only place. Cold, heavy, almost swallowing me whole. It was as if the world had forgotten me there, and everything I carried from the war, the sounds, the images, the invisible scars, weighed down on my shoulders like tons of stones. People looked at me on the street and thought I was fine, but inside I screamed silently. Maybe you know what it's like to carry something no one sees, a pain that seems endless. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. That rainy morning, the sky was as gray as my thoughts. I walked aimlessly, trying to escape the memories that insisted on haunting me. Every clap of thunder felt like a gunshot. Every puddle of water took me back to the craters left by explosions on the battlefield. Escape was impossible. I felt trapped in a past that wouldn't let me go. Have you ever felt like you're fighting something that only exists inside your head, but seems more real than everything around you? That was my world, and it was in that state that I stumbled, fell to my knees, and got covered in mud. At first I just wanted to get up and leave, but something caught my attention. There was something there, half buried, dirty, almost invisible. My hand trembled as I touched that piece of paper. It was as if I'd found something forbidden, something that shouldn't be there. When I uncrumpled the sodden paper, I realized it wasn't just anything. It was a verse amidst the mud, waiting to be read. It seemed impossible that it was there, right in front of me. I don't know about you, but have you ever found something so small and, at the same time, felt like it had been placed there just for you? My heart raced. It was as if someone had whispered in my ear, "Read." The rain fell heavily, mixing with the tears I hadn't realized were falling. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that perhaps I wasn't alone in this internal war. I sat right there, on the floor, holding that paper as if it were the last shred of life I had left. Stay with me, because what was written there would change everything I thought about myself, about what I had experienced, and about where my life was going. Every word of that verse seemed to pierce my soul, as if written for that very moment. It wasn't a coincidence. I knew it was an answer. But an answer to what? To my pain? To my guilt? To all the times I'd thought about giving up? I wasn't sure, but something inside me began to shift. It was as if the mud that had held me captive was beginning to transform into something else, a soil where something new could be born. And so it was, on that morning that began so dark, that a new story began to be written, a story that didn't end that day but was only just beginning there, in the rain, with a soldier kneeling and a verse in his hands. And it's precisely about that beginning that I want to tell you now, because what happened next was something that never let me be the same again. As I held that verse in my muddy hands, something inside me began to break, and at the same time, rebuild. It was as if a weight I'd carried for years began to dissolve, giving way to something I couldn't even remember what it felt like. Peace. And you know, it's at this point that I want to open up a space for you, listening now. Perhaps you've already experienced a moment like this when something unexpected brought hope back into your life. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far, or if you've experienced something similar. I read every comment, and believe me, your words may be exactly what someone else needs to find the strength to carry on. And if this video has already touched you, take the opportunity to like it now. It may seem simple, but when you like this video, YouTube understands its important message and shares it with more people who also need to hear it. And if you feel that this kind of story is good for your soul and want to continue walking with me on this journey, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. This ensures you'll receive the next episodes and won't miss anything that's coming. Because this story is just beginning, and what happened after that day in the mud was even deeper, more transformative. And that's exactly what I want to tell you now, so stay with me. My name is Daniel. I'm a war veteran, and for years I battled ghosts no one saw. I returned to the United States after my service feeling like the world was moving on, but I was stuck back there, somewhere between the desert and the memories that haunted me. The people around me celebrated my return, calling me a hero, but deep down I felt like I'd left the best part of myself in that foreign land. The applause, the flags waving from balconies, the thank you for your service from neighbors were beautiful words. But none of them could silence the noise I heard every night before falling asleep. It was as if the war had moved on with me, and no one but me could hear its sounds. For a long time I hid this pain. I smiled at my mother at Sunday dinner, greeted friends at the supermarket, and pretended I was fine. But the hidden truth was that every louder noise, every fireworks display on the 4th of July, every ambulance siren sent me back to that place of fear. It's hard to explain to someone who's never experienced it, but it's as if the body has its own memories, activated without asking permission. And then you find yourself back in the trenches, even while sitting in your living room. I remember a night when the silence in the house was so heavy I could barely breathe. I got in the car and drove aimlessly along the empty country roads. The farm lights passed like shadows, and I wondered if I would ever feel like I belonged here again. The road seemed endless, but deep down, it was within me that the path was lost. It's at this point that transformation begins, when you realize you can't go on like this anymore. When you find the limit between continuing to sink or reaching for something that can lift you up. And it was in this silent search that rainy morning happened. I didn't know that a simple stumble could change the course of my story. When I found that verse in the mud, it felt like time had stopped. The raindrops hit the paper and ran down my face along with the tears I hadn't even realized were there. It was as if God had prepared that moment behind the scenes, waiting for just the right second to show me that I was not alone. This realization changed my mindset. I began to realize that perhaps there was a way to rewrite the narrative of my life, to give new meaning to the scars I carried. The curious thing is that, in the following days, I began to notice things I'd previously ignored. The bird song at dawn, the smile of a child in the supermarket, the smell of my mother's breakfast. Small things that seemed like unimportant details began to become signs that I was still alive, that there was still beauty all around me. It was as if that verse had opened a window to a world I'd forgotten to see. This was the first conscious decision I'd made in a long time, to stop running away, to stop running from my thoughts and start facing them head on. But don't think it was simple or quick. The nights were still long, the nightmares still came, but now I had an anchor, something to remind me that my story didn't have to end in pain. This is the most powerful part of the healing journey. When you understand that it's not just about erasing the past, but about learning to walk with it differently. And this led me to a discovery that would change not only how I saw myself, but also how I saw the world around me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because it was precisely at this point that my life began to take on new meaning. Each day I discovered new layers of this transformation, confronting memories I had buried and finding strength where I never imagined. This journey led me to understand that the answers I sought lay not in silence, nor in oblivion, but in the courage to allow myself to feel everything I had avoided for years. It was painful, but liberating at the same time. And that's where the story begins to become even more intense because the impact of this decision reverberated across all areas of my life. Write in the comments. I know what that feels like. I want to read it, and know that you're also walking out of your own mud, finding strength where there seemed to be none. That phase of my life felt like a maze with no way out. The nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The ceiling seemed to swallow me, and the early morning silence was broken only by the sound of my own heart beating too fast. I only had to close my eyes for the flashes to begin. Explosions, dust, screams only I could hear. I'd wake in a cold sweat, my entire body on alert, as if I were back on the battlefield. The worst part was that outside, the world remained the same. My neighbors watered their plants. The street kids played soccer in the yard. The flags on the houses still flew, and I felt like I no longer belonged. It was as if the United States, the place I'd fought for, was now foreign territory to me. On rainy days, the feeling grew even stronger. The sound of drops on the roof brought back memories of soggy nights sleeping in the mud, waiting for the sun to rise and the gunfire to stop. I could smell the wet earth mixed with the smell of gunpowder even on my own balcony. It was a smell that lingered in my memory, as if it were inside me, and the more I tried to push those memories away, the more they came, as if they were trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. It was my mind pulling me back to the place I most wanted to forget. Isolation became my armor. I began avoiding family gatherings, friends' parties, and even trips to the supermarket. It was easier to hide than to try to explain to anyone that the war wasn't over for me. It's hard for anyone who's never been through it to understand how the sound of a door slamming can make your entire body react, or how a simple news report on TV can trigger an anxiety attack. I told everyone I was fine, but inside it felt like I was sinking a little deeper each day. The loneliness was so heavy that at times it felt almost physical, as if someone were sitting on my chest. It was during this period that I began writing to myself, in small notebooks that no one else read. I put there everything I was afraid to say out loud. They were pages filled with questions that seemed unanswerable. Why did I come back and others didn't? Why do I feel alive but I'm not living? This practice was my first attempt to face the hidden truth I tried to deny. I was broken inside. But at the same time, it was also the first step in a silent journey toward some kind of transformation, even if I didn't yet know where it would lead. Sleepless nights made me drive aimlessly along deserted roads. I passed through small rural towns, seeing the closed bars, the gas stations illuminated by cold lights, and the empty parks. It was as if I were observing everything from the outside, like a stranger in my own land. Every red light seemed like an invitation to give up, but there was something that pushed me to keep going. Perhaps it was the memory of a comrade who told me, before setting off on the last mission, "No matter what happens, find a reason to come back." That phrase echoed in my mind every time I thought about giving up. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this was the point where I began to realize that it wasn't just the war outside that had scarred me, but the war within me. I began to understand that my body was constantly on alert because it still believed the danger was real. It was as if my brain had become stuck in survival mode, and this realization was painful because it showed me that I couldn't simply wait for time to heal everything. I needed to make different decisions, choose to face these triggers instead of running away from them. It was a dive into myself, and each memory that returned felt like a wound being reopened. But it was also the beginning of something new, something I couldn't yet name. Write in the comments, "I feel this way too." I want to see how many people identify with this part of the journey and know what it's like to live a battle that no one sees. I remember perfectly the night everything came to a head. It wasn't just another bout of insomnia or another flash of memory that made me break out in a cold sweat. That night was different. The rain was falling heavily, and the pounding on the roof sounded like the entire sky was falling on me. I got out of bed in the middle of the night, not knowing exactly where to go, and just wanting to escape. I grabbed my coat, walked out the door, and began walking aimlessly through the nearly deserted city streets. The puddles reflected the streetlights, and each thunderclap felt like a gunshot echoing in my mind. My feet carried me to an abandoned place at the end of the street, a lot full of mud and weeds. It was there that I felt there was nothing left to hold me. I fell to my knees, and it wasn't just from exhaustion. It was a collapse of everything I'd been trying to hold back for months. Mud coated my hands, the cold bit my face, and for the first time I didn't try to fight what I was feeling. I screamed, cried, and pounded the ground as if I could rip the pain from my chest. It felt like everything I'd experienced up until that point was falling apart, like I had nowhere left to go. That was the night I thought it would be easier to just disappear. And it's hard to admit it out loud, but that was the darkest point of my journey. I was alone, drenched, and the silence around me was so profound I could hear every rapid beat of my heart. It's curious how, in those moments, time seems to distort. I don't know if I stood there for minutes or hours. All I felt was the weight of everything I'd lost, the faces of my friends who hadn't returned, the guilt that crushed me. It was as if all the decisions I'd made in the war were coming back at once, exacting a price I didn't know I could pay. This was my hidden truth, the place no one had access to. In the midst of that darkness, I began to question everything, the meaning of my life, the purpose of coming back, the reason I was still breathing. It was at that moment, when I thought nothing else was there, that something caught my eye. A piece of paper half covered in mud, faintly illuminated by the reflection of a distant lightning bolt. At first, I considered ignoring it, but something inside me made me reach out. My hands trembled as I picked up the paper and began to smooth it out. It was a verse. I can't explain how, but those words seemed to have been left there for me. I read and reread them, trying to understand how something so small could carry such a great impact. And there, kneeling in the mud, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of hope. It was as if that simple verse was a direct message to me, a reminder that there was still a chance, a way out, a reason to keep going. The rain kept falling, but it seemed like each drop washed away a piece of the weight I carried. I won't say everything changed in that moment because that would be a lie, but it was the first time in months that I felt that perhaps there was a way beyond the pain. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because that moment was more than a momentary relief. It was the turning point that began to transform my mindset. It was there that I decided, even without knowing how, that I needed to stay alive, that I needed to take a step out of that place even if it was just a small step. That was the first conscious choice to fight for my own life, and it changed everything that would come after. Leave a comment. I've been there if at some point you also felt like you were at rock bottom, but found something that kept you going. The scene of that moment is still etched in my mind as if it had happened yesterday. The rain was falling so hard that the sound drowned out my own sobs, and I was there, kneeling, feeling the mud running down my arms. My fingers were covered in dirt when I saw that piece of paper half buried, dirty and crumpled. Something inside me made me stop. My hands, though trembling, moved on their own, as if they knew it was important. I reached for the paper carefully, trying not to tear it, and pulled it out, heavy with water. The wet texture was slippery against my fingers, and my heart raced, as if I were about to discover a secret hidden for years. It took a few seconds for my eyes to focus. The rain pounded the paper, blurring the letters at the edges, but in the center the words were still legible, almost as if someone had protected that exact passage. It was a verse. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. The air seemed to grow heavier, and suddenly I could no longer hear the sound of the rain or the wind. It was as if the entire world had stopped for that encounter. My lips trembled as I began to read, and each word seemed to pierce me like a blade, but not with pain. It was as if I were being woken from a deep sleep. I read it once, twice, 3 times. I couldn't put that paper down. I couldn't stop staring at those words. It was as if someone had placed that verse there just for me, in the exact place and on the exact night I needed it most. Logic said it was a coincidence, but my heart knew otherwise. With each flash of lightning that lit the sky, those sentences seemed to shine a little brighter, as if beckoning me to believe them. I felt a mixture of fear and relief, because part of me knew that if I accepted what was written, I could no longer live the same way. My hands clutched the paper tightly, and the tears now mixed with the rain, falling uncontrollably. It was there, on that muddy ground, that something began to break inside me, and at the same time something new began to be born. I wasn't just reading a verse, I was receiving a call. It was as if someone were telling me, I know where you are and I've come to find you here. This realization left me breathless for a few seconds. I looked around, as if expecting to see someone standing there with me. I saw no one, but I felt a presence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because it was at that moment that I realized that the transformation wouldn't begin in a comfortable place, but there, in the middle of the mud, at the lowest point of my journey. The impact of that encounter was so powerful that it immediately changed my mindset. For the first time in months, I felt like I didn't have to carry everything alone. That small piece of paper seemed to hand me a key to escape the labyrinth I was trapped in. I knew the journey would still be long, that memories and fears would continue to surface, but something inside me had been ignited. I wanted to understand what those words truly meant and how they could become a living part of my story. Write in the comments. I would have picked up that paper too, if you feel you would have done the same if you encountered something like this in a moment of pain. When my eyes first fell upon those words, it was as if the air grew lighter, even with all the rain falling upon me. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, a lump form in my throat, and suddenly the tears I'd been holding back for months simply began to fall. I cried like I hadn't cried since the day I returned home from the war. It was a deep, deep cry. The cry of someone who had carried for so long something they couldn't share with anyone. There, alone in that mud-covered field, I felt I was no longer alone. It was as if someone had found me in the midst of my chaos and said, I see you, I know where you are, and you have not been forgotten. Every word of that verse seemed written for me, for that very moment. I felt as if I were receiving a letter directly from heaven, an answer I hadn't even known I was expecting. Memories of my friends who hadn't returned began to flash before my eyes. But this time, without the crushing feeling of guilt, for the first time, I felt like maybe I could honor their memory by living differently, instead of slowly destroying myself inside. It was as if the weight that had kept me grounded was being lifted, little by little, with each tear that fell. The sound of the rain seemed to become background music for that moment. The puddles around me reflected the streetlights, and for a moment, everything went silent, as if the whole world were giving me space to feel. I felt my shoulders relax, as if I'd put down an invisible backpack I'd been carrying all along. My fingers still clutched the paper, and I was afraid to let go, as if opening my hand would make the feeling go away. But it didn't. The presence I felt there stayed with me, filling the void I'd been carrying. I stood up slowly, my knees still covered in mud, and looked around. Everything was the same: the terrain, the rain, the cold night. But something inside me had changed. It was as if I had stepped through an invisible door and entered a new chapter of my life. It wasn't euphoria. It wasn't an explosion of joy. It was a quiet, deep peace that told me I could take the next step. And this feeling was so intense that, as I returned home that early morning, I knew nothing would ever be the same. Walking in the door, I sat down on the living room floor, still soaked, and began reading the verse again over and over until it stuck in my mind. It was as if I were reshaping my mindset in that moment, deciding that this would be my new anchor. The clock was almost 3 a.m. when I finally felt my body relax enough to fall asleep on the couch. It was the first deep sleep I'd had in months, and when I woke, the sun was already illuminating the house. The morning light felt different, as if life had taken on new colors. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because that encounter wasn't just a momentary consolation. It was the beginning of a real transformation. It began to affect my choices, the decisions I was about to make, and the way I saw the future. I knew the journey would still be long, but something inside me had realigned. It was as if an entire framework of emotions, traumas, and questions had been rearranged to give me room to breathe. And this space was what allowed me to begin walking out of the darkness, one step at a time, without rushing to solve everything at once, but with the conviction that I was on the right path. Leave a comment. I felt this peace too. If you've ever experienced a moment when it felt like something bigger spoke directly to your heart and gave you the strength to carry on. The next day, I decided I couldn't just survive anymore. I needed to turn that spark into direction. I made a strong coffee, opened the windows to let in the cool morning air, and placed the crumpled verse on the kitchen table like someone setting up a compass before hitting the road. I grabbed an old notebook and wrote 3 simple lines. Today I start small. Today I don't run away. Today I choose to start over. It sounds small, I know, but it was the first conscious decision after so long of being swept along by the current. I called the VA clinic office and scheduled an evaluation. Just hearing the attendant's voice say, "We have an appointment on Thursday," made my stomach churn, because facing head-on what lay behind the nightmare seemed more frightening than any night patrol. Even so, I knew, running costs more. And that morning I chose to pay the price of confrontation. My routine began to take on new contours, almost as if I were redrawing the map of my life. I went back to running on my local school field, next to the bleachers where my name had once been shouted when I scored the touchdown that sent our team to the state playoff. The wind on my face, the sound of my footsteps on the rubber track, the smell of grass mowed by the janitor, all of it served as a reminder that my body was still my own, that I could reclaim the territory anxiety had occupied. After the run, I'd stop by the diner on the corner, where the owner, Mrs. Thompson, would serve me blueberry pancakes and ask, in the direct way of an American mother, "Are you sleeping better, son?" I smiled without making any promises, but every conversation there, amid the clink of cups and the jukebox playing old country, had a real impact on my mentality. Ordinary life, with its small rituals, was a silent antidote. I returned, with timid steps, to the church on Main Street. The worn carpet, the wooden pews polished by decades of hands, the prayer board, the folded flag beside the pulpit, all these symbols pierced me in a new way. The pastor didn't know about my night in the mud, but somehow he seemed to speak directly to me when he quoted that, "Mercies are new every morning." I wasn't looking for magic. I was looking for ground. And there, I realized that faith, for me, would be less fireworks and more a steady ember. A small but living flame that warms and guides when the road grows cold. At the VA office, I told the therapist what I'd avoided saying out loud. The guilt, the feeling that I didn't deserve to be here, the images that insisted on returning in the exact sequence of a cursed patrol. He listened to me unhurriedly, explained about triggers, about how the brain learns to survive and then doesn't know how to rest again. He put names to the shadows: hypervigilance, avoidance, re-experiencing. And when the hidden truth was given words, the shadows shrank somewhat. I left with breathing exercises, a practice of writing down intrusive thoughts, and a question that would haunt me for weeks. What is true now? Repeating this in the grocery line, in traffic on a difficult night, became my way of checking reality, not the memory of the explosion. I found Mr. Collins, a Korean War veteran, sitting on a park bench, wearing an American Legion baseball cap and hands that told stories through their scars alone. He didn't ask any questions, He simply pulled a metal coin from his pocket, the kind of challenge coin veterans exchange, and handed it to me as if to say, "To be continued." We talked about what can be said between men who've seen the worst up close and still believe in the best. He taught me to keep the sun on my back when memories are overwhelming, because the body learns from the light what the mind forgets. I laughed, but I started practicing, and it worked more often than I expected. At home, I set up a makeshift workbench in the garage and bought cedar wood. The sweet smell of sanding wood, the fine dust falling on my gloves, the rhythmic sound of the saw. It was my way of giving my hands a job that pulls my mind back to the present. I built a small box, not perfect but real. I engraved the date I found the verse inside with a soldering iron. It was my physical reminder that the journey had a milestone, a before and an after. And behind the scenes of this process, revelations came. I was relearning to inhabit my time. Not the time of what if, not the time of should, but the time of now. On the first 4th of July, after my return, I decided not to lock myself in my room. I wore earplugs, drove to the lake, and stood on the other side, where the fireworks were just reflections on the water. With each explosion, I looked at the surface shimmering with colors and breathed, reminding myself that I was safe, that children laughed behind me, that families spread blankets and passed lemonade. It wasn't easy, but I stayed, and when the last glow faded, I realized I didn't need to run from myself. It gave me a kind of quiet strength no metal ever gave me. Writing letters I never sent was another strange and necessary decision. I wrote to my friends who never returned, telling them where I was, what I was afraid of forgetting, what I promised to honor. I went to the cemetery on a cloudy morning, left the letters under a smooth stone, and remained there without speech, without haste. Sometimes respecting absence is the most honest form of presence. I left with the feeling that parts of me, previously scattered, were gathering themselves back into the same body. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because if the verse lit the flame, it was daily decisions that fueled it. I learned that transformation isn't proven by one grand gesture, but by small, repeated commitments. I forgave myself for not being the me I used to be, and instead began being the me I am now. This changed the way I work. I accepted a part-time shift at a local lumber yard where the pine scent fills the warehouse, and I returned to coming home with the good feeling of honest exhaustion. It changed the way I relate to others. Instead of pushing everyone away to protect them from me, I let them know that sometimes I needed silence, and other times I needed company for a Braves game on the radio, without much conversation, just the comfort of presence. On Sundays after service, I volunteered in the church basement, where the community assembles food baskets, sorting rice, filling cans, carrying boxes. It seems simple, but it reminded me that service has meaning when questions have no answers. I met Mrs. Ramirez, who lost her son in Afghanistan. She told me about the garden she planted with his friends, each flower a memory. I stood there, listening, and understood that hope can be cultivated like tending a flower bed, watering, pruning, waiting, and it blooms in its own time. Not all were linear victories. There were setbacks, days dragged out, a late night when I almost drove aimlessly again. But I now had an internal emergency kit: breathing, writing, running, prayer, my therapist's phone number, Mr. Collins's coin in my pocket. And with each turn I was surprised by the resilience that grew, that invisible muscle we only discover when we have to lift something heavy inside. I realized, with a clarity that hurt and healed at the same time, that my worth wasn't tied to what I could endure in war, but to what I could build in peace. Over time, I kept the verse in a simple frame and placed it in my entryway, not as a charm, but as a daily reminder that I was found in the place I thought no one would see me. It summons me to the basics: sleep, eat, work, ask for help, forgive, give thanks. And when the world's news weighs too much, I turn off the TV, walk to the square, sit on the same bench as Mr. Collins, and let the afternoon light do its slow work of realigning my thoughts. Every now and then a boy rides by on a bike wearing a school jersey, and I find myself rooting for him without him knowing. This rooting for the continuation of what is simple has become a kind of prayer. If I could name what changed the most, I'd say it was the perspective. Before, I looked at life from below, compressed by the mud of, "It'll never get better." Now, still with mud on my boots, I see the horizon, and paradoxical as it may seem, accepting the scars as part of my history has stripped them of their power to dictate my future. The impact of this understanding is silent, but profound. I no longer wake up trying to win an ancient war. I wake up ready to live the day I've been given. And this commitment to today has been my best long-term strategy. He writes in the comments, a fresh start in progress. I want to know who else decided to put one foot in front of the other, even when the road is still wet. The days that followed that encounter in the mud were the strangest I've ever experienced, because nothing around me seemed different, but inside me, something was stirring. I still woke up in the middle of the night, sweaty and with my heart racing, but now there was a difference. I no longer ran from what I was feeling. I sat on the edge of my bed, took deep breaths, and repeated the words of the verse as if they were an anchor keeping me steady. It was the first step in accepting that my mind was trying to heal, and that I needed to be patient with the process. In the early days, that was all I did. Breathe, repeat, wait for my heart to slow down. But each night I spent like this, without getting up to drive for hours aimlessly, was already a victory. I began to notice that the mornings, which had previously been gray, were beginning to gain color again. I would go for walks through the neighborhood streets before the traffic started, just to listen to the rustling of leaves and the birdsong. It was a kind of moving meditation, a simple way of telling my body that the day had begun and that I was here, present. It was on these walks that I began to greet neighbors I had been avoiding for months. The man in the blue house, who always watered the garden, responded to my wave with a wide smile, and it was bigger than I could explain. Small gestures like this reminded me that I was still part of the world, and that isolation didn't have to be permanent. I also summoned the courage to call my younger brother, the one I hadn't spoken to since returning from the war. The call was brief, a little awkward at first, but at the end he said, "It's so good to hear your voice." Those words echoed throughout the rest of the day as if they'd cleared a blockage in my chest. Little by little I began to connect with my family again, starting with quick lunches and short visits, without forcing myself to stay longer than I could handle. It was a delicate but real new beginning. Another step was returning to the local gym, not to try to be my old self, but to give my body a chance to release the accumulated tension, the sound of the weights clanging, the smell of iron and sweat. It all brought me back to the present. With each set, I felt as if I were releasing some of the anger and pain that had been bottled up inside me. It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about emotional survival. And when the workout was over, I'd go to the locker room, wash my face, and look in the mirror. Little by little, I began to recognize the man staring back at me. But not everything was simple. There were days when I felt like giving up was overwhelming, days when I felt like nothing had changed. It was in those moments that I would return to the crumpled paper with the verse and reread it, like remembering a promise. This repetition slowly, almost imperceptibly, shaped my mindset. I realized that despite the setbacks, I was moving forward. Every small decision, like eating better, writing in my notebook again, or accepting a friend's invitation to watch a game at the local bar, was a piece in the puzzle of my recovery. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because it was during this phase that I understood that transformation is less about a grand miracle and more about daily choices. It wasn't an instantaneous turning point. It was like pushing a heavy door that had been stuck for years. With each push, it opened a little wider, and through that crack, light entered. This light began to reveal truths I'd been avoiding. I needed to forgive, I needed to talk, I needed to accept professional help. And as frightening as it was, I realized that this path was the only one that could lead me to a truly new life. Write in the comments, "I'm opening the door," if you also feel like you're taking these first steps, even if small, towards a new phase. Perhaps you, who are listening to me now, feel the same way, trapped in a place that seems to have no way out, carrying a weight no one sees. I know how difficult it is to wake up every day feeling like the world keeps spinning, and you've become frozen in time. It's as if you're inside a bubble of silence, where no one hears what's going on inside your mind. The people around you smile, work, make plans, and you're there trying to survive another day. I know that emptiness. I know the feeling of a war raging inside while the outside seems to demand that you carry on as if nothing had happened. And maybe you're hearing this right now precisely because you need this reminder. You are not alone. There is a way back, and no matter how impossible it seems right now, no matter how dark everything is, there is a way out. Sometimes that way out doesn't come as a grand revelation, but as a whisper, a detail that might go unnoticed if you weren't paying attention. For me, it was a verse found in the mud that lit the flame. For you, it might be a word someone said to you today, a song that played on the radio when you were about to give up, or even that video you decided to watch in the middle of a difficult morning. None of this is coincidence. Here in the United States, we have this habit of extolling resilience, of saying that we must get up after every fall, that we must keep fighting no matter the cost. And there is beauty in that, yes. But no one talks much about the space we need to grieve, to feel, to accept that something hurt. I needed to learn that being strong doesn't mean hiding the tears, but rather allowing them to fall and wash away some of the pain. Sometimes the true act of courage is admitting, I can't do it alone. That's how I began my journey of transformation. That's how I took the first step. It's important to remember that transformation doesn't happen overnight. There's no magic key that turns and erases what's been experienced. What exists are small choices made day after day. Maybe today your step is simply allowing yourself to take a deep breath and say to yourself, I deserve to try again. Maybe it's calling someone you love and saying, I need to talk. Or maybe it's just getting out of bed, opening the window and letting the light enter the room. These small decisions are like bricks that build a new path. At first, they seem fragile, but over time, they become a solid road for you to walk. When I think about that night in the mud, I realize it was an invitation to not give up, to believe there was still something in store for me. And if you're here now, maybe this is your invitation too. Maybe you're living your own dark dawn. Maybe the weight is almost unbearable. But the simple fact that you're still here, breathing, hearing these words, is already a sign that there's a chance. Life has this curious way of surprising us when we least expect it. And I know it's not always easy to believe this. There are days when everything seems like a vast void. But I've learned that it's precisely in this void that something new can be born. It's in the darkest place that the smallest flame makes the biggest difference. That's how it was for me. In that moment, kneeling in the mud, I was at my limit. But that piece of paper showed me that God was still looking for me, that He still saw me. That changed everything because suddenly I felt my suffering wasn't invisible. I felt I had been found. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because there's immense power in realizing that the pain you carry can transform into strength to move forward. When I began to open myself to this idea, everything began to change. It wasn't quick, it wasn't pretty, but it was real. I discovered that even on bad days, I could choose not to lose myself. This was the shift in mindset that kept me going. Realizing that I didn't need to be completely healed to move forward, that I could keep walking even with the scars, was liberating. I saw people around me also going through silent battles, veterans, single mothers, young people who lost someone too soon, and I understood that we all carry some form of pain. But I also understood that we all carry an immense capacity for new beginnings. I began to see signs of life in places where before I only saw ashes. In the hot coffee my mother made in the morning, in the sunset over the fields of my city, in the laughter of a child at the market. They are small reminders that life continues to try to speak to us, even when we are closed to hearing it. So if you're listening to this and feel trapped, like there's no way out, I want to tell you, you still have a choice. It may be a small step, it may be a decision only you will realize, but every step matters. Every step is an act of resistance against the darkness, and it's in this process that you'll realize you're not alone. There are people who will support you, there are resources available, there is help for you. But the first step is believing you deserve help. Write in the comments, I accept this invitation if you feel that this message spoke to you and that you are willing to take a step, even a small one, towards your new beginning. I know that everything I've shared here isn't just a story about me. It's also a mirror for many people going through something similar. This journey that began in the mud was the starting point for a profound transformation. And that's why I always say that each of us carries within us the power to rewrite our own story. When I found that verse, it felt like someone had lit a lantern in the darkness showing me there was a way. And if you felt something similar while listening to me, perhaps this is your moment to pick up that same lantern and illuminate your next step. I want to invite you to be part of this process with me. Not as a distant spectator, but as someone who engages, who connects, and who decides to participate in this conversation. When you comment below, you're not just writing a few words on a screen, you're leaving a record. Something that can be read by someone else experiencing the same despair you once felt. The impact this has goes far beyond a simple comment. It could be the push someone needs to not give up. When you like this content, you help spread this message to others who may be searching for an answer and don't even know where to begin. The algorithm can be a cold and automatic thing, but each like is like saying, This matters. Show it to more people. And believe me, there are people right now in cities big and small across the country who need a word of hope and who can find it through your gesture. This is a way to be part of something bigger, to transform your own moment of pain into a channel of healing for others. And if you want to continue following this journey, walking side by side with me in this honest conversation about new beginnings, faith, and overcoming, now is the time to get closer. Here, we don't pretend life is perfect, but we learn to find purpose even in the broken parts. Each new story I bring, each reflection, each behind-the-scenes glimpse of this journey is an invitation to remember that you are never alone. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this connection we're building here is a powerful reminder that every life has value and every scar has something to teach. Your story can inspire someone. It can be the answer for those struggling to move forward. So don't keep it to yourself. Leave a word, a phrase, something in the comments that sums up what you felt. It can be simple, it can be sincere. Right there. My story is still being written. If you feel that this message found you at the right time, and that you are also ready to continue your journey of transformation. If you've made it this far, I want to truly thank you for sticking with me until the end of this story. This time we spent together wasn't just about sharing what happened to me, but about creating space for you to reflect on what you're experiencing as well. If this video resonated with you, please leave a like, not only to support the channel, but because it shows me we're building something worth continuing. And write in the comments, "This message was for me," just so I know you've stuck with me this far, and that this conversation has found a place in your heart. If you want to continue this journey, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Each video is another step in this transformational journey we're on together. And before you leave, check out the video right here. It complements everything we talked about today and might be exactly what you need to hear right now. Click and stay with me there, because our conversation is just beginning.